Hey everyone, it's a lovely Wednesday afternoon here. I have the pleasure of bringing on Gene Munster, one of the prominent figures on Wall Street covering stocks, founder of Loup Ventures. He is here. He's going to walk through a lot of different topics that you guys brought up today. So this is going to be a fun little podcast for you. Without further ado, Gene, how are you doing today? Thank you for coming on.
Doing great. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Awesome, man. So, really, how we want to go about this is how did you really get into covering stocks? Because we have a lot of listeners that have, gotten into stocks because of Robinhood, because of Reddit. They found this fascinating, especially as you can't really do too much during, this pandemic. And so they've
hmm
really started to research, go online, try to, interact with their friends. What got you into covering stocks before, Reddit, obviously, and this type of phenomenon?
So I'm old. I'm 50, and when I got into it, it was before any of these platforms, obviously. And I think what got me into it is just a intense curiosity and of just a love of the mechanics of business. It was a great fit for kind of aligning those two. And I've one of the founding partners of Loop over the last 4 or 5 years. But prior to that, I was an equity analyst, and so we made stock recommendations on tech companies. And so I think what got me into it was curiosity, a love of business, a love of tech, and then I got really lucky with someone who out of college took a risk on hiring me and training me and to understand how the mechanics of the market work. I would just reinforce too. I think what we're seeing in retail around more people with kind of pursuing investing. I think people's insights. You don't have to be quote professionally trained to have a good insight about how the world is going to be disrupted. And I just want to encourage people to follow that voice when they see disruption around the corner. It's a very important topic today.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. When you talk about like disruptors, are when you go into determining what kind of a position you guys take, and I know you on your mission statement with Loop Ventures, you are trying to find cutting edge tech companies, technology that's going to spur the future. Is that really the biggest part when you go through and determine what you want, or what you're going to, cover? Is that really, the biggest thing, or what really goes into that?
So it is, and it starts with kind of the pinnacle of our week. The most important part is a brainstorming session that the firm has together. And we talk about those massive areas of disruption. And there's probably only 5 or 10 areas that can be just radically disrupted that have not just the disruption piece, but there's a lot of money that could be transferred from one group to another as this disruption happens. And so that's what ultimately starts as we think about the companies to invest in as we identify these. And the learning that I've had is that if you can correctly identify the segment of disruption, what it gives you is the flexibility to potentially have just these incredible 10, 5x type of returns over a 5, 10 year period. It also gives you the benefit of if there is some mistakes that go along the way, whether the market kind of takes some fits and starts, the broader economy starts to slow, for example, or if there's maybe some mistakes that the management team makes. Usually, a great end market, a massive disruptive, will forgive any sort of mistakes in the near term, and so that's one of the other reasons why we always anchor our investments in the which markets are being disrupted.
Has your philosophy changed since you got in to now? Because you've seen it all. You've covered, been through the dot-com bubble, you've been through the financial crisis, and now you're here in 2021 where it's the Reddit rebellion. You've got, a lot of these
Yeah.
different, companies that have seemingly come out of nowhere. Tesla has become one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Has any of that changed during your, career?
Yeah, I think you probably look back. I've always been a longer term focused. I've patience in investing as a powerful formula for success. And I think that it's been there. I would say maybe that's been there for the vast majority, that kind of view about finding massive disruptive markets. Maybe the one piece that's changed, I think, is maybe initially I would have gotten more focused on like a management team. And I mean, this is very early in my career. I might have been more persuaded around a presentation than I have been for the last 20 years. So that piece has changed. Maybe just really instead of thinking about the pitch and the company and the product, really to don't start there. Start with the transforming. What's the massive opportunity?
Has Reddit and Robinhood, have they like changed your philosophy at all? Because we've seen, obviously a lot of, and I'm not necessarily insinuating you've been in short selling because I'm not 100% positive. I know you guys at Loop do a lot of like long term type of things.
Mhm.
Have you really, changed that, or has Reddit and Robinhood really affected that?
It has not. We we're an investment firm, so there may be a day in the future where doing some sort of hedging is part of what we do. That may be in the case, but as it stands, we have not been shorting, and we tend to always have a long bias, and so that everything that's happened there has not had a direct impact on us. But it has just reminded us of the importance of, when a voice needs to be heard and when those voices can collectively change, that we need to be respectful to those. And I think from a long, if you take just the long perspective, how does this potentially manifest itself, or what changes would we make? Is that, if you see something that's up 150% over a 1 week period, there may be some kind of provisions we could put around positions just to accommodate for these massive spikes. But as it stands, we wouldn't make a strategic bet against it. And I think this what we've seen here, kind of this empowerment of the retail investor, it's here to stay. And if there is a bear market that I think would probably lessen some of the intensity around it, and maybe even lessens it for a year or 2 years. But ultimately, I think that this the light that's gone on, that the collective body of retail investors can have more strength than an institutional investor. I think that theme, that takeaway, is going to be here for a long, long time.
That's incredibly fascinating. One topic I want to get into, and it's not necessarily in regards to Reddit, but I've seen that you've really compared Amazon and Zillow. What kind of similarities do you see in that, other than, obviously you could kind of extrapolate that, as the economy improves, as the housing market improves, Zillow, has that first mover just as similar as Amazon did. But what kind of rationale kind of led you to that kind of a comparison between the two?
There's many comparisons, and maybe I'll just start with the most significant ones, which is, I think, a misunderstanding of who Zillow is. And this misunderstanding was pretty significant, I think, 6, 9 months ago. I think in the last few weeks, it's some of that gap is closed, but I think there's still largely a misunderstanding. The specific example is when Amazon in 2010 started to advance beyond just its own selling in a reseller network, or third-party sellers on their platform, and really started to advocate spending for infrastructure. It was something that was a red flag for investors. The stock hit a period where it was not doing well around that. There was misses in earnings. There was continued investment. And investors asked the question, this is a tech company. They don't have any business in building fulfillment centers or even building networks for delivery. And that's kind of a dirty business. That's a low margin business. And I think the similarity to a Zillow, maybe at the most basic level, is investors historically have thought of Zillow as a real estate advertising business, and they have a powerful grip on the top of the funnel. 200 million people per month in the U.S. It's quite remarkable. Look at Zillow at least once, and they have this tight grip on that funnel, and they should just continue to grow that and optimize that advertising business, because it's low touch. It doesn't require a lot of risk to do that.
How
But
big can Zillow get?
So we take it's an opinion. I want to stress that this is our opinion, is that this could be 3 times bigger in the next 5 years. I mean, we don't have 1 year price targets. This is not a price target. It is just an opinion internally that we think this can be 3x bigger. And maybe just to talk a little bit about, let me just quick finish the thought on the Amazon
Hmm.
comparison, is that in the case of Zillow, the infrastructure that Amazon built for so long, that's analogous to iBuying, home buying online with Zillow, is that they have to take some level of risk when they purchase a home. They have to trade out of that home. It's different than a typical tech company. You're talking about titling services, remodeling services. These are dirty businesses, just like you got to roll your sleeves up kind of types of businesses, very similar to the fulfillment side. And I think that investors right now generally see that as a negative, and I think that over time they'll see it as a positive. And then just to move forward to your question about like how big can this company ultimately be, it's about the massive untapped market. And there's 140 million homes in the U.S. Typically about 5 to 6 million sell per year. So let's call it 4 to 5% of homes are traded every year. And if you look at the value that is transacted around those homes, this is around just the fees around that. This is to do with everything from brokerage fees to title insurance, moving, those types of fees, more initiating your mortgage. It's $200 billion per year. Now, Zillow, as it stands today, is just under 10 billion in revenue. Next year, they'll be just under 10 billion. So it's a massive market that they can ultimately get into, and that's kind of how we get comfortable at being behind this. Is that we just believe strongly that they're in a great position to really disrupt the market. Opendoor is another company that could have a big impact. We also have are also investors in Opendoor. And so we just think that the time is now for iBuying.
So you really think like the entire real estate market's kind of going to shift as, the years go on, and as, the decade continues. Basically, the way someone buys a house is
Mhm.
fundamentally going to change
Change. Yep.
than how it is
Yeah.
right now. Then you go to, your local realtor or whatnot, and they give you a list of all the houses. You think you can go from looking at a house to just purchasing a house with the click of a button. It's going to be that simple. And that's where Zillow comes in.
The selling will be at the click of a button. People will, because you spend a lot of time in your home, they'll still likely, walk into a home and want to purchase that. But they'll, get access to that inventory through Zillow. And the answer is yes. And I also, this kind of things over time that have really stuck with me is that transformation, these massive markets end up taking longer than we expect and end up being bigger than we expect. And in this case, I think back about real estate. I mean, this is an area that we've been tracking for 15 years. And there's always been companies that have kind of needled at this, saying big market, big opportunity for disruption. And none of them ever got there. And so I do think that this is going to happen. I think that Zillow and Opendoor are in a great position to accomplish that. And I think that it's not going to happen overnight. It's 0.5% of homes are bought, of those 5 to 6 million. Talking about 0.5% today are sold online, and in the future, we think in 10 years that can go to 10%. But when you just think about, I mean, at the most basic level, just transparency, and the industry has traditionally been it's been cloaked around price transparency. And if Zillow or Opendoor can come along and actually give people clear price transparency and liquidity, that's a big deal that I think millennials will want.
That's incredible. Basically, it kind of really goes to that Amazon comparison where it's, you see the item, you see the entire inventory of all the options that are available, and then you can just pick one and it ships directly to your house. While it's not, apples to apples, it is very similar in terms of the business model. And so I can definitely see how you get to that. Do you expect like a housing resurgence to come, towards the back half of the year then? Because obviously that would have to play into a part of
Well,
how
yeah,
Zillow.
I mean, this is going to be part of why there's going to be a lot of lumpiness to Zillow and Opendoor, their stocks in the next few years. Is that I think in the near term they're going to be influenced by people's view on the housing market, and it's understandable that investors, both retail and institutional, will trade around it. So, for example, if interest rates go up, that would be a perceived negative for the number of homes that are sold in real estate, and that may very well be happening. Rates have been low; they're probably going to go higher, and but I still stand behind this transformative view that, and part of the reason is that if the number of homes sold goes from 5.5 million to let's say 4.5 million in the midst of, let's say, some sort of a pullback in the home buying market, if that happens, that is less shots on net for Zillow, for example, to sell, buy, be part of an iBuy. There's just simply less homes traded. That is a negative. But the overwhelming positive that I think well outweighs that negative is that we're still nascent in terms of the number of homes that are bought and sold online. And
Hmm.
so to answer your question is, this is, look what happened with Tesla over the past year in the car market. The car market was down. Some of the automakers were down 30% year over year. And Tesla was up, what it was, at 50, 60%, I forget the exact number. And that's an example. It would have been even better if not for all the headwinds that happened in 2020. But these transformative companies can continue to transform even with significant near-term headwinds. We got to get the long term right to get this right. I feel good about the long term here, but the near term is going to add some lumpiness.
Yeah, going into that kind of economy where it's really like pre and post pandemic, two companies that reported earnings recently, Uber and Lyft. And I saw that you had said that you like Lyft in the long term more than Uber. Can you kind of just expand on that thought? Because, to someone, Uber is a lot bigger of a company in that I believe they're over $100 billion market cap. They have Uber Eats, food delivery. They have, a lot of different parts of their business. Why do you like Lyft over Uber? Because to the average person, that seems very counterintuitive because you see more Ubers on the road than you
Mhm.
do Lyft, I feel like.
It is. I mean, yes, there's more Ubers on the road, but Lyft's market cap is smaller, so there's more room for it to go up. Its addressable markets are smaller, but they're in the U.S., Canada, eventually, kind of Canada today. Um, and they're not going to have that same massive global footprint that Uber is. That's one of the reasons why we like Lyft, is that I think that there's a lot of nuances between ride sharing country to country, and I think some of the focus is positive. The second is the incremental bump as they start to get more into and consider their road forward with food delivery. That has been a nice positive for Uber, obviously, but I think that that still isn't reflected in kind of my opinion. It's not reflected in where Lyft shares are. And then you get the piece of the model itself. By being more focused, you have a cleaner operating model, and the probability that they can be more profitable longer term is higher, and that's critical for ride sharing.
How, how has, and it kind of, going away from Lyft to Uber, how really has Uber changed from Travis Kalanick, you think? Because they were a company that, burned a lot of cash. They obviously had a lot of scandals with Travis, but have they like righted the ship in essence? Because obviously their stock has gone up, but have they made it a more competitive landscape against Lyft than previously?
I think, yeah, there was definitely some. I would put it in the camp that it was kind of a startup culture in a big company, and I mean, look at the growth that they had. It's understandable uh, it's not acceptable, but you can understand how that
Hmm.
progression happened. And so it's a very different company. There's changes at the top. I would consider Lyft more buttoned up than Uber, just in terms of culture. But I think that Uber has made the most progress off of a pretty low bar initially to get there. And I mean, we think about Travis, you think about Elon Musk, you think about kind of people who kind of invent markets, and I am by far not making excuses for any of
Hmm.
this behavior. But what I'm just simply want to point out is that sometimes these crazy founders have baggage that investors need to weigh whether or not they want to be a part of that.
That gets me into one of our mailbag questions. So that's why this episode is very special for our listeners, because we were able to go out to our listeners and ask them questions, or have them ask you questions, really, that they want answered. And an individual wanted to know who is the most interesting and your favorite person that you've ever covered, or company, and then who was your least favorite. You don't have to answer the second part, obviously, but it kind of brings in Travis and Elon. Those are hot button characters right there. So who really has been your favorite over the years?
I think it's Steve Jobs, and it is Steve Jobs. I think that he had the benefit of kind of figuring out who he was outside of the spotlight, maybe the lure of social media and Twitter. And he came back in the late 90s and really, I think, had found a very clear focus. I enjoyed covering that part of him. His focus, his attention to detail, I think was really remarkable, was unique at the time. I think also some of his faults were I became quite enduring, and just his how he would maybe potentially see something that we don't see, and also maybe uh, somebody else presents it to him, and maybe he would create this field around him. It's been referred to as the reality distortion field. I don't think of that as a negative. I would probably put it the reality focus field, or just the focus field, that his ability to kind of take these products that maybe somebody else thought up of the iPad. Maybe it was Tony Fadell, but for him to take it and just make it part of the organization and really advance it to the iPhone, that's really magical. And I think he stands above even the greats that are here today.
Was the iPhone release in your career, like, I would say, was it the greatest, product debut you've ever seen, or were there any others? Because if you think today, I can't imagine myself living without an iPhone, let alone, anyone who has an iPhone wanting to give that up because their whole
Yeah,
life is really, really on that device. Is that like the most transformative
for sure.
release?
At least that's the one that I've because it was kind of this one moment. The internet kind of came together as a bunch of pieces, and the iPhone was actually an event. And keep in mind that the iPhone was rumored for several years before it came out, and then they announced it in like January, and then they actually released it. I think it was in the following June. And the takeaway was, so there was a lot of interest. There's ads that were being run, and I think the best way to describe it, and everyone kind of has their moment when they got the iPhone, and this is just out of good fortune to be covering tech and being covering the Apple company at the time, currently too. But one of the I remember I went to New York, was in China, and there was media in China talking about the iPhone release, which was going to be released in the US. And I came back to New York for the night before, and I went to the Apple store on Fifth Avenue, and I just remember seeing the big line that was out in front there. And then the next day, I got the iPhone and lived in Minneapolis, and was after that was returning to Minneapolis. Had the phone, set it up, and I remember sitting at the gate to board my flight and looking at my phone and looking around at everyone else, not looking at their phones, because it really wasn't a smartphone.
Yeah.
People would text at the time, and just think, the thought crossed my mind, like, this is going to really change the world. Like, there is no chance we're going back to that. And so, that, to answer your question, it was the iPhone, and it delivered on a very high expectation.
Do you, outside of that, do you have like a particular Steve Jobs story that really stood out to you, or perhaps, I don't know if you've ever met him, but an interaction that you've had potentially with him where it was, memorable? Because
Yeah.
not many people have had that opportunity, obviously, to pick the brain of him, that let alone, follow him.
Yeah, there are people who knew him really well. There are people who work closely. I had interactions with them, but it was from as an analyst. And I would, don't want to articulate any particular interaction, but would just say that uh, he was very close to what people were saying about Apple. And I think if he felt like you, me, anybody was missing anything, I think he was pretty open to to letting his opinion be known, and appreciate about it. It was the few interactions I did have with them, each of them was extremely stressful.
Is there a CEO in today's world that mimics Steve Jobs, you think, or that comes close to as much ingenuity that he had?
Yeah, I think um, there are similarities between uh, they're not they don't perfectly line up, but there are similarities with Elon Musk, and I think that they're not the same personalities, but just in terms of kind of the vision and the big picture, for obvious reasons, both of those uh, I think really stand above the fold, and different personalities, different approaches. But as far as just kind of radical thinking, that's I think they both uh, check that box. I'm trying to think, like, if even you go down kind of the list and think about all the other founders and CEOs, it seems like there's a pretty wide gap between those two and everybody else.
Speaking of Elon, another question that we have, and a subject that you cover, a topic you cover a lot and have been known for, is Tesla. Where is Tesla 10 years from now? Your best guess. Obviously, there's a lot of differing opinions on them. Some people view them as just an auto company. Other people, like myself, view them as a tech company. And I know you do as well. But where do you think Tesla's going to be 10 years from now?
It's going to be a very different company. I think similar. Every tech company needs to reinvent themselves every decade or so, and Apple's done a great, I think, the best job of any company to do it. Zillow is doing that right now, right, from an advertising business. Amazon went from being an e-commerce to a logistics company, and Tesla needs to make that shift in the next decade. And that theme about this will take longer but be bigger, I think that applies to both EV and autonomy and a lot of the things, whether it's electric jets and other things that Tesla can get into, the energy, the renewables. So maybe the answer the question in a couple different ways is, one is, where is Tesla a decade from now in terms of market cap? My opinion is it's going to be a bigger company. I think it's going to be a much bigger company. And part of it is a belief that they do have brand permission right now to not only continue to sell cars, because they have these people that they buy their cars, they become evangelists for the cars, but there's a separate factor of, as they get into other products, whether it's a robo-taxi fleet or energy capture and energy storage. You think about what they could do in insurance for cars, that they could do with, even like in HVAC, is there are other segments that the brand kind of stands for, techie forward, breaking the paradigm. And I think that's valuable. And so I think that these markets that they're getting into, these are big markets. We like to talk about just the straight up transportation market, just for cars alone, passenger cars alone, is about $2 trillion annually. The smartphone market's 500 billion annually. And so when you think about Tesla and its future, they're going to lose a lot of market share over the next 20 years, but they still have a chance to be the biggest auto company, or one of the biggest ones, in a massive addressable market, which ultimately I think is going to be a positive.
You brought up the robo taxi, and I saw, and I was watching CNBC one night. It might have been after, it was either after Tesla's earnings report or it was after one of the rideshare companies, Lyft or Uber, and you were on Fast Money, and you brought up that you believe Tesla's going to launch an app later this year in regards to a robo taxi. What did you really mean by that? Like, what kind of an app are we talking about? Are they going to be like an Uber and a Lyft, and you can just
Pretty much
dial it up and say,
Yeah.
hey, come pick me up on the corner of the street? Or
So our prediction is in 2021. So this year they're gonna launch a chaperoned fleet, and chaperone means there still needs to be a human in the car. And why that's important is we're not going to have full autonomy across the U.S. by the end of the year. I think that FSD and the its progression will continue to advance, and we're going to be surprised at how far it gets this year. But it won't be prime time. Take a nap in the back of the car by any means. And so, what they need to do is, if the other massive part about transportation beyond just selling cars is getting into actually moving people around, and the value that they can capture there is you have to start to build a robo-taxi fleet. This is something that Apple is intensely wants to do, along with Google and what they're doing with Waymo, Uber, obviously, and Lyft want to do autonomous. So DD in China, all these. And what it ultimately means is a chaperone fleet is that there's a human behind the wheel. The work of driving, because driving all day is a lot of work. I've never done it, but it is a lot of work. And just having a lot of the FSD type features are going to take some of the edge off of that. So I think that a driver driving in a Tesla with the benefits of FSD, even if it's not full, I think will be positive. And then they turn this app on. They just basically put an app out and allow you to get picked up and brought around in a Tesla. And initially, very few probably Tesla owners are going to want to do it. Number one, you have to get mom and pa's to go and buy 5 of them or 10 cars and then put them into the fleet. But it's going to take time. But that is what we think is going to happen by the end of the year. And because there's going to be so few of them out there, your wait times are going to be really high. And so there's a lot of things that they need to do to get the flywheel going. But it will be at least the start of the flywheel. And of course, at the autonomy day, was it 2 years ago almost, they showed the kind of the makings of the app. So I think it's going to be this year.
I I think, from what you're saying, I'm in California right now, and you drive around here in Southern California, here in Los Angeles, and you see every single driveway, I feel like, has a Tesla. And so in a city like this, you would see that
Yeah,
sort of ride share service really work
yeah,
because
the challenge there is that, if I rudely interrupt, the challenge is that a lot of those people who own those Teslas don't want to submit them to the fleet, or don't want. So they're out there, but you got to have
it's
somebody who's there's this kind of
one,
disconnect between people who can afford to buy a $50,000 car with FSD and who want to drive for
once you say though that it would be easier for them to scale that type of platform in an area where there are a lot of Teslas
yeah,
because where I'm
for
from
sure.
down in Ohio, you drive around, you see like one Tesla
Right.
every like 200
Right.
cars
Yeah. Well
here.
said.
Yeah, so
Well,
I
yeah, we're definitely going to get a better, yeah, I mean, areas like LA and San Francisco where there's more Teslas, you definitely will have better coverage. And I think it's the start, and where I think it gets really exciting for the Tesla robotaxi fleet is when eventually they get to autonomy and you see, as I mentioned, these mom and pa, there may be hundreds of different people who own 5 Teslas, and it basically is their business to go and clean them at night and recharge them. And then they go and work for them during the day. Kind of a fun concept.
they're basically taking Turo and turning it into
That's
the
exactly
Tesla
it.
machine. Um, Going into another question here, what would you say, two things, the best call you ever made and the worst call you've ever made? Tesla could obviously be one of the better calls you've ever made because, as we've seen, how Tesla is done. But I don't want to put words into your mouth, so you can, obviously pick here.
Yeah.
But what would you say be the best and worst calls?
I'll just pass on the best calls. We've had some that work. We've had some that haven't. I think I'd say that the worst call hasn't been a stock call, but it's an easy answer. For the worst is predicting that Apple would do a television. I was firm believer in that, and
You don't think Apple TV is going to come through and produce, with studios and everything? You don't
uh,
think that's going to happen?
let me put it this way: is I learned a lesson, and the lesson is, if they're working on it, doesn't necessarily see the light of day. That's the lesson. And the do I think Apple is going to come up with a TV? I don't think we're going to see a TV anytime soon. The next 5 years, and I don't think there's any big plans for that to come out. Do I think that if you look at what Apple does really well, does a display, an integrated Apple TV into a display, does that make sense in their product line? I think it does. Uh, but that is my lesson learned, and uh, for sure my worst call.
Well, if that's your worst call, then you really are you're really hitting some, big ones because it's not even saying, worst call Apple with a TV because theoretically that's still very much in the cards down the road. You
Yeah, but
just
I
can't,
was pretty.
time it.
It was before it was before your time, but I was pretty insistent on it.
Well, we'll we'll leave that at that part. Um, One other question for you: if you could pick one stock for this decade that we just started, 2021 all the way through 2030, and 1 year in 2030, you look back and you say, yeah, that was the stock of that decade. You could obviously say, Tesla was this stock or this decade stock.
Yeah,
What
I mean,
would
if there needed to be, I'm sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so really what would you say is the one that, really sticks out as that potential, stock everyone remembers like, oh shoot, I should have bought that one, way early on,
And this is the context of this passing of the baton idea. I
Yeah.
think, like for example, Apple, big believer. I think my opinion is that this goes meaningfully higher. But as far as kind of the baton passing, Apple had the computer in your pocket. Tesla had EVs. I think it's Zillow around home buying.
So you really do believe they are the next Amazon potentially then?
Yeah, maybe. And again, open door. There's room in there, and but I think that it just to me is a natural fit to where millennials want the world how they want to transact, and I think there's a lot of grease and a lot of messiness to get there, which means it's going to be a bumpy ride. But that to me feels the one. If I had to give you one, that's what it'd be. And I'd just kind of throw out there, maybe there's something around space too that ends up being a big deal. We're doing work there. More to come.
Wow. Well, that's quite the teaser right there. More to come. Do you think SpaceX going to space, do you think is that really leading into potential SpaceX IPO? I've heard rumblings that they're going to
Yeah.
IPO potentially this year, maybe next year. I don't really, I'm not really a Wall Street insider at all, so
Yeah.
I don't really get any
Don't know.
information. But
Yeah.
but is
Yeah.
that
They
kind of where
just,
your space play is coming from?
I would say that, that could be an opportunity, and we're definitely not there. But if you just think about, again, kind of back to the principle, massive markets, massive things that can be disrupted. Space, there's a little bit of room for disruption in space.
All right, Gene, one last topic I want to cover with you because we've actually gotten a lot of listener interest over, these last several podcasts. We've, had the opportunity to have Dan Ives on, Ari Levy from CNBC, obviously, and then yourself now. What if someone, we have a lot of novice investors and a lot of people that are just starting to get in, but also a lot of people where they didn't really follow the markets as much. They might have just given their money to a financial advisor or whatnot, but now they're very interested. What kind of advice would you give someone that is either just getting into the market or wants to get into your type of a profession down the road? Because interest has never been higher, and that's a
Yeah.
question I get all the time to ask individuals like yourself when we have the luxury of bringing you on.
I think it's I'm not sure what the other other esteemed panelists would have said, but my view is you ease into it, and there's learnings, there's like options can be really dangerous, and they may have a appeal of making money quickly, but I think that would be one piece to it is, if you look at, you've been working with somebody that you trust for a long time, a financial advisor, I would absolutely keep working with them, but maybe take a piece of it. Maybe it's 15% of the money, and start to do something yourself, and ask yourself the question around what do you see as disrupting. And then the last piece is um, just continue to trust in your view of disruption. And for example, stocks are going to go up and down. They're going to have bad days, and you could have a thesis on a stock, and it could be down 25% in 3 months after you buy it. And there's many examples of those stocks go down 25%, go down 50%, and they go up 10,000%. eventually it happens. So trying to get my point is, don't beat yourself up if the timing doesn't work out right away. Just keep focused on the disruption. And also just recognize that if something really changes, you have a different view of the future, to recognize that maybe you made a mistake and move on.
Gene, if our listeners want to learn more about what Loop does, or read some of your publications or view some of your content, where can they do that?
Yeah, just check out we love doing research. We love publishing our thoughts. Check out Loop Ventures, and no ads. Have at it and send any comments you want. I appreciate the opportunity here. Enjoyed it very much, and let's do it again soon.
Let's do it again, Gene. Thank you so much for coming on here. We appreciate it, and you have a great rest of your week here, and have a great weekend.
Bye for now.
All right, bye.